And violence are the pillars of Berserk, then the series' true mascot isn't Guts or Skull Knight or even Griffith, it's Slan. Anyone that can call witnessing a first-degree felony beautiful needs to be locked up, but knowing Slan, she'd probably enjoy that too. She's the definition of sadomasochism and everything that blurs the lines between reality and insanity. So, in this video, we're going to uncover everything that makes her tick the way she does, how she became a Godhand in the first place, and what her life might look like by the end of Berserk's story. So, without further ado, this is the entire life of Slan, explained. The pinnacle of depravity and ecstasy, Slan's possible origins and rebirth as a Godhand. It's pretty well known that Berserk's Godhand is modeled after the Cenobites from Hellraiser. In fact, the original Godhand was comprised of 4 members, just like Pinhead's Gash from Clive Barker's horror erotica classic. But the big difference between the two is the fact that Miura's Godhand is woven into the very fabric of his universe, whereas Barker's Cenobites, sans Pinhead, are shock and awe-spreading missionaries. The influence of the Godhand can be felt in pretty much every panel of Berserk, especially Slan's, because she's the embodiment of forbidden ecstasy and maddening lust. As members of the Godhand, Slan and her brethren are incomprehensible beings whose powers transcend the mortal flesh. They don't arrive on Earth promising pleasure and pain unseen and unheard of. They pull humans into their domain and exploit the evil that lies within. Even when they're not being summoned by a Behelit, they're constantly influencing humanity's consciousness to do their bidding because technically they're all part of it. And no Godhand member affects the human mind quite like Slan. She's all about making the frozen heart embrace its deepest conflicts as sources of pleasure because the only other possible similarity between Slan and the female Cenobite is their backstory. Before she became a Cenobite, the female was a nun and she wasn't very pious either. Sister Nicoletta joined the church to be close to God, but as the years waned, she found sins to be far more pleasurable. Ultimately, she gave in to her desire for eternal pleasure and pain and solved the lament configuration. This backstory comes to us from the Marvel Comics adaptation of Clive Barker's work, so its canonicity is dubious, but it does make a lot of narrative sense. The suppression of one's true desires as part of an institution that fundamentally denies them that desire is exactly the kind of backstory that gives birth to Godhand members. Void was denied his brilliance by Geiserik. Griffith was denied his ambition by the King of Midland. Sister Nicoletta defiling God in his house and then being denied access to the church is a viable origin story, and having sex in God's house just sounds like something Slan would be into. Of all the Godhand members, she's the one that's closest to a Cenobite, reveling in the contradictions of existence and delighting in pain. So it isn't unreasonable to think that Miura went full source material for her adaptation. Also, the adaptation we're talking about was released in 1990 when Berserk was in its first year of publication, so Miura had plenty of time to draw inspiration from other sources. He allegedly named Slan after a novel written by A.E. Vaught about a species of creatures with golden tendrils that grant them unparalleled psionic powers. Slan's hair even looks like a mass of writhing fleshy tendrils, which could be paying homage to those creatures, and her influence on human lust is as telepathic as it gets, considering she's usually stuck in the depths of the astral world. But that's what she looks like after her rebirth. Before that, we're pretty sure she could have looked like any other woman, albeit probably more conflicted than the rest of them. She could have been like Farnace in her youth, a broken woman who found comfort within the rigidity of religion, but unlike Farnace, who rejected fanaticism, accepted her weakness, and reformed herself, Slan took a different direction. She must have continued questioning why what was happening to her, and instead of accepting responsibility, she resisted change. At some point, she came across a Behelit and kept it, which is curious considering the Holy See sees it as a pagan totem, and being found with it would have gotten her accused of being a witch. This is assuming she was a nun, of course, but even if she wasn't, the results of an inquisition would have been the same for her. We can't pinpoint why Slan was singled out as a prospective Godhand member, but what we can say is that she must have been in a position of power. All Godhand members had some authority over a group of humans in their previous lives, so perhaps Slan was a church mother with a hidden taste for depravity. Then, one day, her sins caught up with her and put her in mortal danger, which is exactly the kind of situation that allows a bearer to trigger the Behelit. Even sinners have people who define their humanity, who end up becoming ideal sacrifices, and when one's sinful self is portrayed as their whole truth, what choice do they have but to accept the Godhand's deal? Causality is often presented as an unavoidable specter, but ultimately what it offers is a choice. Every apostle in Berserk chose to sever their humanity and live out their wildest, most inappropriate dreams as demonic reincarnates. Every Godhand makes a similar choice, but instead of being transformed into monsters, they become a metaphysical manifestation of intense and dangerous human emotions. Their personalities are a concentration of humanity's most evil thoughts and desires given form within the astral world. Every decision, every mistake, every interaction of their human lives was meant to turn them into Godhand members. This is why we're pretty certain that Slan was some sort of perverted nun, because she's pretty much a textbook succubus. She takes great delight in explaining who the target of a demonic ritual must sacrifice and why. When she does it during Griffith's eclipse, she also touches herself, which makes her even more unsettling. Based on her understanding and limited view of causality, we'd say she was the youngest member of the Godhand before Griffith came along, but that doesn't mean she was young when she ascended. We've seen that the power of evil can restore one's youth, as it did in the case of Wild, so Slan could have been an old hag for all we know. This would make sense considering Zod was shocked that a cub like Griffith was destined to become his new master. Zod was there for the fourth eclipse, and so he would have seen the fourth Godhand's birth, if not sensed it. His surprise would be understandable if the reincarnation he witnessed was that of an old person, and Slan wanting eternal beauty for forbidden pleasure as an old, suppressed woman is the perfect backstory for the role she plays in Berserk. Putting the order of her ascent aside, we know that she was proactive in the Godhand's machinations even before Griffith's eclipse, thanks to the Flame Dragon Knight light novel. She'd been turning fools into thralls for decades before coming across her final kinsman, all for the sake of ushering in an age of darkness. And yet, bizarrely enough, when the promised time arrives, Slan's focus isn't entirely on him. It's also on a man that's seemingly destined to never be at her side, which is exactly the kind of challenge that excites her. The birth of the fifth and meeting her favorite boy. The first Godhand to manifest during Griffith's eclipse was Slan, and this is going to sound perverted as hell, but she was touching herself when she made her advent. Slan does that a lot throughout all of her appearances, and it's much more creepy than seductive. She gets aroused by prospective mass murder, lives for sacrificial rituals, and is endlessly enthralled by them. She's the one who tells Griffith that he's going to have to sacrifice his friends if he wants real power, and when Guts protests the Godhand's assertions, Slan bursts out laughing. Even though he stands in hell, Guts is unwilling to let his friend become a demon, and Slan declares this would make Guts an excellent sacrifice because their bond would make Griffith even stronger. This shocks all in attendance because generally you'd think that hatred would make a person want to give up their humanity, but in Berserk it's the opposite, and Slan loves that fact. She explains to the Quivering Falcons that the Crimson Behelit is only received by one who's destined to become a Godhand, and then reiterates the fact that the rest of the band are mere fuel for the angelic advent. Guts tries speaking out once again, but he's quickly shut down by Slan, who corrects his assumption that the Godhand were going to force Griffith's hand. She says he will choose to sacrifice them of his own volition, and this one surprises the fallen Falcon himself. Void spits a few bars about the inevitability of causality, and Ubik gives Griffith a manipulated trip down memory lane, which ends with him acknowledging that he had always known he was a demon in human skin. He led hundreds, if not thousands, to early graves, all in the pursuit of his dream, and that was just the beginning. When he snaps out of Ubik's mind palace, he questions what he saw, but Void and Slan put him back on track. Void asserts he was always a mass murderer, and Slan brings up the fact that his back alley path was now well and truly blocked. Yet, even after hearing that he would willingly kill them all for power, the Falcons still looked up to him for direction. She tells him that even though they looked crushed right now, if Griffith doesn't go through with the sacrifice, they should end up forgiving him. They should welcome him back with open arms, and then he could go on living as he was. All he needed to do was commit his wounded, disabled self to them, and he could get the past back. But in exchange, he would have to burn everything in the ruins of his dreams. The Godhand knew exactly which buttons to push to get Griffith on their side, but as you can see, Slan's main focus was on addressing the sacrifice itself, the nature of it, and what would happen if it wasn't realized. She's the one who instigates people into accepting their true nature, while Ubik takes care of the guiding process. Then, in swoops Void to cinch the deal, and Conrad speaks as much as Griffith can post-torture. When Guts tries to break Griffith out of his metamorphosis cocoon, the Godhand mocks him. Slan tells him he'd definitely heard what Griffith said last, considering he was well within earshot. Guts went through all 5 stages of grief in a second once the truth settled in, then he turned his gaze towards the monsters that were killing his actual friends. At this point, he'd only fought 2 apostles, barely survived both encounters, and couldn't exactly finish off either of them. Zod spared him, and Wild was mortally wounded by Guts, so Zod was the one who actually killed him. There were dozens of apostles swarming towards him now, if not scores, and all he had for protection was a broken dagger. That didn't matter though. Nothing mattered after Griffith's betrayal. Guts grabbed his broken dagger and got to work, slaying apostles left, right, and center while his own body was being ripped to shreds. The effort was futile given their numbers, and he must have known it deep down, and yet Guts managed to injure, maim, or kill a sizable number of apostles, which is what drew Slan's attention to him. She was impressed with Guts' resistance in the face of the impossible, and remarked on the irony of it all. The more he fought, the more anguish his soul felt, and the better it was for Griffith's rebirth. Slan's main focus was seeing her kinsmen fully embrace their true desires, because in doing so, they fulfill her desires as well. Griffith's title as the Godhand is the Demon King of Longing. Slan's must be the Demon Queen of Dark Desire. This is affirmed by her reaction to Griffith's first act after being reborn as Femto. To the Godhand, witnessing the first act of their brand new kinsman is a sacred ritual. Much like a newborn babe's first cry, it sets the tone for their new life as a vessel for evil. Before he transcended, Void told Griffith that if it is reason that goes beyond human intellect and makes playthings of children, then it's cause and effect that a child bear his evil and confront destiny head on. A Godhand's first act post-rebirth is also a test to see just how capable they are of spreading the gospel of evil. Femto passes that test with flying colors because he chooses to sexually violate Casca in front of Guts to assert his newfound dominance. Slan is moved to tears by this decision, and that reveals the true extent of her twisted perversion. The violation of Casca is the most harrowing plot point we've come across in any manga. There's a moment where you can see it literally break her mind, as though Femto were splitting her in half with an invisible sword, but Slan was clutching her chest, breathless at the quote-unquote beauty she was witnessing, which to her mind was proof of Femto's devotion. She says love, hate, pain, pleasure, life, death, all of these contradicting things were alive and melding in the first act of Femto's life. To her, this was what it meant to be human, to be evil, and seeing a woman having such a disgusting reaction to Casca's assault is what solidifies Slan as a paragon of sin. If the whole Sister Nicoletta parallel didn't make sense a few minutes ago, it probably does now. When Guts and Casca escape the Eclipse with Skull Knight's help, she's mildly surprised. Slan knows the Godhand are merely agents of a god, not God themselves, and she speculates that even this was a part of causality's grand plan. It ultimately doesn't matter because the birth of the fifth closed their rebirthing cycle and put the gears in motion for the emergence of a new world and an age of darkness. In this new age, Slan had 2 great desires to fulfill, continuing her god's work and silently observing a new pet project. The former was easy, considering she'd been at it for literal centuries. The latter is where things get interesting. Slan meets Guts again 2 years after she saw him first, this time during the second reincarnation ceremony of the Slug Count. This ceremony is part of the Black Swordsman arc, so it was written long before the Eclipse was conceived, and much of it feels disconnected. Conrad, for instance, speaks multiple times, whereas in the main story he has just 2 lines of dialogue. Berserk feels more like a hard fantasy story, which we've explored in a separate video that you should definitely check out. It's a testament to his skill that Miura managed to keep the Godhand's dialogue here ambivalent enough for it to line up with the Eclipse, because it's clear that Slan didn't recognize Guts. Despite that, her responses to his actions are near identical to what she says during the Eclipse. Void and Femto spearheaded goading the Count into sacrificing his daughter, and in the meantime, Slan admired the inhuman resilience of their uninvolved visitor. Guts had piqued the room's interest as soon as he called out Griffith. Slan was shocked that he could even move towards Femto with the extent of his injuries, and thoroughly impressed by his willpower. As Griffith explained the relationship between the nature of a demon and the pain caused by the brand of sacrifice, every other Godhand member ruled out retaliation from Guts. And yet, the Black Swordsman steeled himself and swung for Femto's head, forcing him to use his spatial powers. Griffith wasn't amused by Guts in the least, but Slan was overjoyed. Once again, the Black Swordsman's uncanny ability to take biblical amounts of punishment drove her into frenzied appreciation, as she's amazed by his purely instinctual counter to Femto's ability given the pain he was experiencing. dancing. She openly admits that she'd love it if he became one of theirs, and while Ubik is just as impressed with him as she is, Conrad points out it's impossible because he isn't ordained. Guts' fate was to end up in the abyss as a sacrifice, which nearly ends up happening during this ceremony, but he could never become a demon himself. In the end, the Count rejects a third chance at life in exchange for his daughter's safety, and Guts manages to free himself from the clutches of endless torture by shooting a cannonball in Femto's direction. The Godhand, knowing its job was done, turns away to depart the interstice, and only two of them sneak one last look at him: Femto and Slan. Femto makes sense considering their history, but Slan doesn't because she has no narrative connection to him. This small gesture was our first hint of an obsession that likely drove Guts to the darkest depths of his mind. But before we get to that, it's about time we explain exactly how Slan's influence works on mankind. The Goddess of Flame and her role in the Incarnation ceremony. The next big demonic ritual after the eclipse is the Incarnation ceremony, which happens 2 years after the Black Swordsman arc. In that time, Slan kept up her usual duties as a Godhand, but she also took on a major side hustle. As a massive metaphysical body of thoughts and feelings, the Godhand can't directly alter events in the physical world, so they use more subtle ways to influence them. The most prevalent method is using their presence to manipulate the collective subconscious of living beings. Every time a plague breaks out in the Berserk verse, Conrad influences it from behind the scenes. In chapter 126, we see him using malevolent spirits as a medium to force a partial advent, take control of every rat in Midland, and inflict all its major population centers with the plague. In Abrahamic religions, a plague is associated with Armageddon, so when it shows up in cities from the Berserk verse, there's a good chance Conrad is involved. Likewise, whenever a group of pagan cultists emerges, it's likely that Slan is influencing their actions. As the Godhand of Dark Desire, Slan is the embodiment of shedding all worldly inhibitions. In her presence, all are enthralled and encouraged to discover the depths of their depravity. This is hinted at during the Black Swordsman arc, but it's confirmed during the Conviction arc. In the former, the Holy Inquisitor Count discovers that his beloved wife was part of a heretical cult of pagan sex addicts. After angrily murdering all her fellow cultists, he goes to punish her as well, but falls prey to her manipulations at the last minute. He tries to take his own life instead, and this activates his Behelit, summoning the Godhand and giving him the quote-unquote strength to finish her off. The initiation ritual involves kissing the of the cult leader, who wears a goat's head mask to cosplay Baphomet, and the priest wields a cross made from a dead crow. The raving priest is often visited in his dreams by Slan, as the Goddess of Flame, who predicts the future to him, like the Kushan invasion, and how only the Falcon's emergence could stop it. She also makes brief appearances at the cult's ceremonies, manifesting her outline in the cooking fires, which further strengthens their fanaticism. The things that we saw in that cave, it's no wonder Slan's a glutton for punishment. One of the cultists, Nina, has an STD, and people still choose to lay with her because that's what being free means there. Slan used euphoria to infiltrate the pagans' minds so she could prepare them to cause mass hysteria and bloodshed. The whole point of manipulating world events and driving people towards St. Albion was to make the death and despair in the region cross a critical threshold. Slan's cultists became the firing shot when they were taken over by malevolent spirits thanks to Casca's brand of sacrifice. Its power was needed to trigger the blood flow of the dead, which would lead to Femto's physical incarnation, and Slan's cultists were the experimental group. They induced paranoia and despair within the refugee camps outside St. Albion by killing and skinning Holy See priests and actively recruiting quote-unquote converts. Their actions led to the resonance between Guts and Casca's brands, which triggered the Incarnation ceremony in earnest, finally giving the Godhand a direct foothold in both worlds. Griffith would further their agenda in the physical world, while the rest of them waited in their preferred layers of the astral world. As the Goddess of Flame, Slan had fulfilled her role in the Incarnation ceremony. Now she could kick back and relax, at least until Femto unleashed her on Earth. But of course, she doesn't do that because she can't resist meeting her favorite boy the first chance she gets. And that chance happens soon after the Incarnation ceremony. Advent in Qliphoth and beyond, Slan's Womb of Darkness, and reunion with Guts. After Femto's return as Griffith, the boundaries between the physical and astral worlds began to weaken. This was due to the incarnation of a divine being in a physical body, but this crossover wasn't initially concrete. It only affected pockets of concentrated astral energies scattered throughout the world, leading to rising reports of trolls, ogres, kelpies, and the like in those regions. It was on a mission in one such region that Guts got the opportunity of a lifetime. After repelling a wave of astral creatures in Enoch Village, his party tracked their targets to a dense, dark forest. Dark forests are pretty creepy as is, but this one looked like it was spawned from hell. The trees had haunted faces. The insects had weird tentacles and eyeballs, and even the grass seemed to be alive with evil. This is because they'd walked into a partial manifestation of Qliphoth. In Jewish mysticism, Qliphoth is the term associated with the dark side of the 10 spheres of the Sephiroth. They're portrayed as being two sides of the same coin in most texts, but Berserk takes that idea and runs with it, turning Qliphoth into a region of darkness that malign beings call home. When Guts reached Qliphoth's center and found scores of trolls ready to attack, he was glad because he didn't have to hold back. After saving Casca from the Incarnation ceremony, he vowed to protect her at all times, but he failed to account for his own darkness. Guts was no longer the man that fell in love with her all those years ago. The Eclipse had invoked within him a black fury and a desire for vengeance that made him just as bad as some of the apostles he hunted. That kind of mindset worked when he was by himself, but as soon as he added Casca back to his party, he tripled the risk to her safety. Two branded individuals attract far more danger than a lone bearer, but Guts himself was a threat to her. When Casca first lost her mind, he was heartbroken because they'd just made their relationship official. Post-Incarnation, he was hoping to pick up where they left off, but he quickly realized, to his despair, that was a false hope. Casca wasn't a warrior anymore, and his blood-soaked journey had turned him into a beast of darkness. This became chillingly evident when, in Chapter 190, Guts assaulted Casca. Since the Eclipse, Guts craved the intimacy he had had with Casca, but he knew that she was mindless and it wouldn't be right. He hoped that spending more time with him might make her remember their relationship, but it didn't. Then, one day, he lost Casca, and after searching for her for hours, he finally found her surrounded by dead bodies, covered in blood, and clutching a sword. The same Casca who couldn't form a coherent sentence somehow managed to save herself from a group of bandits. We know that she did it purely with muscle memory, but Guts didn't. He thought she's okay again, and his desire consumed him. He briefly succumbs to his inner darkness, pins her down, kisses her, and nearly forces himself on her. He realizes too late that he's turning into Griffith, and that's why he takes on new companions in Farnace, Serpico, and Isidro. He lets them perform the duty he clearly couldn't because he was terrified of what he might do to Casca if he was alone with her again, but he wasn't the only one responsible for his blackest sin. We know that the Godhand infiltrates minds and manipulates the lowest levels of subconscious to make humans carry out their will. Something as primal, as visceral as the Beast of Darkness can only exist within Guts' subconscious mind. If that's true, then it opens up Guts to manipulation, and Chapter 219 suggests that that's exactly what happened. Because in that chapter, as he stood in the midst of a pool of blood created by the dead bodies of the scores of trolls he'd killed, Guts was faced by his greatest challenge yet, a Godhand in the flesh. Slan forces an advent using Troll Guts as a medium, which is very different from Griffith's incarnation. This manifestation is only possible because of the weakening borders between the two worlds, and Qliphoth being the astral region Slan retired to post-incarnation. The sheer pain caused by her presence is just enough to allow Slan to spawn her wings and bring him down effortlessly. She tells him she missed him, and that's what made our alarm bells go off at full volume. Slan has always shown an uncanny interest in Guts. Turns out, she kept tabs on him ever since they first met. She felt him in the Heretic's Cave at St. Albion and the Tower of Conviction as well. In fact, she'd been following him every night, feeling all his passions, and perhaps contributing to some of the darker ones. To her, his hatred, his agony, and above all, his fear, made him the perfect candidate for Qliphoth. She rips off his armor and slashes through his physical and spiritual bodies with a single move and challenges him to defy her. Slan sexually suggests that Guts run her through with Dragonslayer, that is, if he can even do that. True to a sadomasochist's MO, Slan taunts him for being a fragile human, and then she asks him to do something the Beast of Darkness also suggested a few chapters ago: make a sacrifice. Slan tells Guts to gain power the same way Griffith did, and at this point, the behelit in his satchel rearranges its face entirely. That means it was on the brink of activation, and had Guts been a lesser man, maybe he would have activated it. This sequence makes us believe that Slan could have been the one who motivated his near rape of Casca, because she is the demon queen of dark desire after all. The fact that her words and the Beast of Darkness's words line up perfectly doesn't feel like a coincidence, and we'd hedge our bets on her having influenced Guts' mind to copy Griffith in Fangs of Ego. But he wasn't evil, and he had a wandering wraith to keep him in line, fine. The moment Slan manifested, Skull Knight galloped into Qliphoth because he wasn't about to let a chance like that slip by. For centuries, he'd been hunting the Godhand, tracking them through the endless layers of the astral world, and he'd never managed to isolate any of them. Slan was alone now, and this was his best opportunity to do something about her. His intervention saved Guts from immediate death and annoyed Slan to no end. She playfully asks Skull Knight if His Majesty was here to join them, hinting that she knows he's Geiseric, which makes sense because she's been a Godhand for a while. When Skull Knight refuses to play her game and says that she was the only one summoned, Slan corrects him and says that she came by her own volition. She wanted to see Guts, and besides, Griffith's incarnation meant that the two worlds were already beginning to overlap, and the Age of Darkness would descend upon the world sooner rather than later. Skull Knight grabs his sword and declares that the time for talk has passed, but Slan reminds him that trying the patience of men was a woman's prerogative. She conjures dozens of ogres from the core of Qliphoth because this place might as well have been her womb. She got a bit too carried away with keeping Skull Knight occupied to notice Guts positioning his arm cannon right over her uterus. He fires it point blank, but it still isn't enough to kill her or satisfy her twisted need for pain. Slan loves the fact that her manifested stomach now has a hole in it, but she wants more. This much pain isn't enough, so Skull Knight lets her have it. He tells Guts that Dragonslayer can dispel this advent because it's been tempered by the souls of thousands of dead spirits, and it turns out he's right. Guts thrusts his sword into Slan's abdomen, slicing her womb in two, but all it does is make her kiss him. The Godhand of Sinful Desire disturbingly climaxes, proclaiming life and death to be writhing within her uterus and calling Guts the best. She dispels her advent and melts back into the astral world, promising a reunion in the new world. Slan's forced manifestation and passing caused Qliphoth to become extremely unstable, and it wasn't going to remain open for long. Skull Knight created an escape route by slicing through space itself with his brand new sword of actuation. Though he would have loved to test it out on Slan, he had to adjust his expectations given the situation at hand. After saving Guts, he disappears, and the only other person who knows about his fight with Slan is Shirkei. The young witch is dumbfounded by the fact that Guts managed to fend off an attack by a Godhand, but then again, this was just the latest in a long line of miracles he'd performed. After this encounter, we don't see Slan resurface in Berserk, or rather, we haven't seen her resurface yet. Like the rest of her kinsmen, she only makes a single vague appearance in chapter 306 with her post-Great Roar manifestation. It looks like a bunch of melted together body parts in the outline of her body. We don't know if she's ever going to return to the manga proper now that Miura is no longer with us and Kujimori is running the show, but if she does, it will be for one of two reasons. The first, of course, is to fulfill the Godhand's ultimate purpose of engulfing the entire world in darkness, even the holdouts. It's possible that Slan is in the same place where Qliphoth was right now, and we just haven't seen her. She could be turning regular folks into beans and we wouldn't know it. The second is to get Guts to join her, which seems impossible now that he's been separated from his behelit and been engulfed by a lotus leaf in the Kushan Stupa. His last appearance in the manga suggests that he's going through a rebirth ritual of his own, but not the kind where he emerges as an apostle. This will be the opposite, because when a man like Daiba holds out hope for you changing your ways, you know fate has bigger plans for you. It's more likely that Slan's reunion with Guts won't even be depicted anymore, but if it is, it's going to be more hostile than sultry seduction. We've predicted Guts will emerge from that stupa resolved and resolute, determined to end the Age of Darkness with whatever power and peace he finds down there. So while we'd love seeing him and Slan become Berserk's forbidden power couple, we just don't think that's in the cards anymore. Instead, Guts will finish the job and run Dragonslayer through her once again, only this time he'll make it stick. And that will be the day the Demon Queen of Dark Desire laughs her last devilish laugh. But as for this video, that's all we got for you guys. Maybe we're completely off base with some of the assumptions we've made here, but our guts tell us we aren't. But just in case we are, we'd like to know what you think, so don't forget to leave those thoughts in the comment section down below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more Berserk content, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Until then, keep on struggling, strugglers.